Hello, you're watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. Over 700 children have died in Somalia. Israeli airstrikes damage Syrian airport. Protests over fuel price hike grip Indonesia. Indigenous groups take government to court in Ecuador. The United Nations Children's Agency UNICEF on Tuesday, September 6 said that more than 700 children have died in nutrition centers across Somalia. It said that these deaths were due to the intense drought and ensuing acute food shortages in the country. UNICEF Somalia representative Wafa Saeed told news outlets that around 730 children have died between January and July this year. She noted that the real figure could be much higher as many deaths have gone unrecorded. UNICEF further added that they have seen a significant rise in disease outbreaks among Somali children. It said that there have been reports of around 13,000 suspected cases of measles in the country in recent months. 78% of these cases are suspected in children under the age of 5. According to the United Nations, its appeal for 1.46 billion US dollars in financial aid for Somalia has been 67% funded, but it warned that more aid is needed to stave off the crisis in the present and going forward. The UN's warnings and appeals for aid for Somali children come just as a day after it sounded the alarm on the impending famine in the country. The UN's humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, on Monday said that the latest UN food insecurity analysis has found concrete indications of famine occurring in the Baidoa and Burakaba districts. He added that the two south-central Somali districts could be in the grip of famine between October and December this year in the absence of substantial aid efforts. Israel carried out airstrikes targeting Aleppo International Airport in northwestern Syria on Tuesday, September 6. The Syrian Arab news agency SANA reported that several Israeli missiles struck the airport at around 8 p.m. The missiles were reportedly fired from the sea. The missile strikes damaged the airport runway, temporarily taking it out of service. Following the airstrikes, the Syrian Transport Ministry, along with Syrian private airline Shamwings, announced the rerouting of all its flights to and from Aleppo to the airport in the Syrian capital, Damascus. Reports noted that Syrian air defense systems managed to intercept and neutralize some of the Israeli missiles. State news media did not mention any casualties as a result of the strikes. According to some news reports, 3 people were killed in the airstrikes. They claimed that the airstrikes targeted a warehouse inside the airport compound being used by a Iran-linked group. This was the second such Israeli attack on targets inside Syria in the span of a week. Last week, on August 31st, Israeli strikes had caused extensive material damage to the airport. It had created a hole in the runway and caused damage to a structure close to the airfield's military area. The Syrian foreign minister had said that last week's attack had completely destroyed the navigation system along with the equipment within. Over the decades, Israel has been carrying out these kinds of aerial attacks on Syria. Its pretext is that Iran uses Syria's aerial supply lines to deliver arms to Syria and the Lebanese group Hezbollah. In recent years, these airstrikes are taking place with increasing frequency. Moving on to our third story, protests have erupted in Indonesia over the government's decision to increase prices of subsidized fuel amid rising inflation in the country. Thousands of protesters have gathered to protest the government's steep 30% price hike for subsidized fuel. News reports said that on Tuesday, September 6, protests and demonstrations were organized in the capital, Jakarta, and other cities. The protests were led by students and labor and trade unions in the country. Thousands of people participated in the protests, including farmers, fishermen, teachers, and domestic workers, among others. In Jakarta, people were seen marching while wearing red and orange bandanas. They chanted slogans against the government's move and demanded that the government raise the minimum wage. Protests in other parts also highlighted the extra burden this price hike will put on people still trying to recover from the economic damage of the coronavirus pandemic. Thousands of police personnel were deployed around the country where protests were taking place, particularly in the capital. Reports noted that 7,000 officers on duty in and around the capital. Many were seen guarding petrol stations as they were feared to be possible targets of popular anger and opposition to the price hike. However, there were no reports of any violence or arrests, and the protests were completely peaceful. The Indonesian government had announced its decision to increase the price of subsidized fuel on Saturday last week. The price increase was the first such hike in the last 8 years. It increased the price of gasoline from about 51 cents to 67 cents per liter and diesel fuel from 35 cents to 46 cents. Reports noted that current oil prices are about 32% higher than what they were a year ago. Indonesian President Joko Widodo defended the price hike, saying that it was unavoidable. He said that this was due to steadily building fiscal pressure on the country's annual budget, primarily due to the energy subsidy. The energy subsidy has tripled this year, according to reports. It currently stands at 502 billion rupiah, or US dollars 34 billion. And finally, Ecuador's indigenous communities on Tuesday, September 6, filed an appeal in the Constitutional Court in the capital, Quito. The appeal has been filed against the state. The appeal was filed by the Singano and Waorani communities who live in the Amazonian region of the country. The appeal demands that the government respect the earlier decision by provincial courts in the community's favor. The courts had directed the government to ban oil drilling and mining activities in indigenous territories. The appeal says that years after the court's verdicts, its directives to the government have not yet been implemented. It urges the higher court to order the government to comply with the previous verdicts and implement them in full without any further delay. Along with the ban of such commercial activities, the court had ruled that the government was in violation of indigenous rights. These include the right to prior and free consultation and the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples. The court had further ordered the government to pay reparations to these communities. Reports said that a delegation of representatives of the two communities went to the court to submit their appeal in this case. Around 50 members were part of the delegation. The president of the Waorani community, Gilberto Nenquimo, told news outlets in front of the Constitutional Court that the delegation's members had traveled for long periods to the capital from faraway parts of the country. They hadn't slept or eaten. The president of the Sinango community also expressed similar sentiments. He called the situation a shame that the government hasn't yet fully implemented the court's verdicts even after so many years. Meanwhile, the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, or CONAIE, also put its support behind the two affected communities. Its president, Leonidas Iza, urged the court to take action to provide justice and redressal to the two communities. He further noted that the two rulings in favor of the communities had come before the last nationwide protest staged by indigenous communities across the country. And that's all we have for today's episode. For more such stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.